On the September of 2013, 19 years old Godwin Ayogu would be accompanied to the park in Mile 2, Lagos, by his father to board a bus for Ghana. It was the beginning of his third year in the University of Cape Coast, Ghana. He would also be given $5,000 in cash to pay up his school fees for that year. When at school, his roommate, lled, a Ghanaian 400 level student, would offer to hold the money for safekeeping, and Ayogu would agree. Although it would be said that Ayogu was the one who gave the roommate the money to hold for him, either ways, the money ended up in the hands of his roommate, lled. September, October, November, December, January, February would pass, and Godwin Ayogu's school fees would still not be paid. In all the months that passed, Ayogu wouldn't also return home, not for the Christmas holiday nor for the New Year's, but he would remain in constant contact with his family and make plans to visit on the 20th of February 2014. While in contact with his family, the fact that he hadn't paid the school fees would be kept a secret, but it would clearly bother him. His father would sense something wasn't right with his son, and on 2 occasions his father would ask him what was wrong. He would say it was nothing, that he had a cold or a running nose. On the 19th of February, a day before his long-awaited return home, Godwin would be found dead outside the school campus by the roadside, with many stab injuries to his chest and throat. The killing of Godwin Ayogu would raise many questions. 2 of such questions would be how safe are Nigerians in the diaspora, and how far is our government willing to fight for us outside the country? Put in mind that Godwin was just one of 7 Nigerians killed in the diaspora at that period of time, and so it was basically the height of it. At this point, Nigerians had had enough. The Godwin Ayogu story would become a national concern, one that would make headlines, blogs, and even be carried by channels television. Godwin's parents would make several television appearances, all for the call for justice for their child. But there was one problem. Justice was in the hands of the Ghanaian authorities. And as you can imagine, the road to finding justice for Godwin Ayogu was only about to play out like a typical Ghanaian movie. When the body of Godwin Ayogu was first identified as a student of Cape Coast, the first thing the university tried to do was deny that Ayogu was ever a student of the school. They claimed he hadn't paid the school fees for the year, and so they didn't recognize him as a student. They wanted to make him look like a rogue or an unserious student who brought his death upon himself, and this would come as a total shock to his father, who clearly had given him the school fees to pay in cash. The unpaid school fees would lead to the start of the investigation by the Cape Coast police. It would be discovered that Ayogu's Ghanaian roommate had kept the money for Ayogu, and it would be learned that he never gave Ayogu back the money because up till his death, the fees had remained unpaid. The police would question Abotsi on why he didn't give Ayogu back his money. Abotsi would claim that Ayogu had taken $600 out of the money, which left the money at $4,400, and so it wasn't enough to pay the school fees, and that was why he didn't give him back the money. But the school, Cape Coast University, would slam Abotsi, calling him a liar because the actual school fees to be paid was indeed $4,400. So, the remaining money, if Ayogu took $600, was definitely the exact school fees needed to be paid. The police would come back to Abotsi again in response to the school's claim. This time, Abotsi would change his story and claim that Ayogu had taken all the money from him before he was killed. How convenient. The case of Ayogu would soon begin to fade slowly at this point, as the Cape Coast police would not be able to provide the killers of Godwin Ayogu even after several interviews and collection of statements from everyone who knew him. This would bother the Nigerian students in Cape Coast University, as they feared that the Ghanaian police were trying to sweep the case under the rug. They would reach out to Nigerian blogs and share their fears. Instantly, the news that armed men connected to Abotsi killed Ayogu would lead headlines. This would spark up Nigerians again. Lawyers, bloggers, politicians, and even the then governor of Lagos State, Fashola, would express interest in the case, going as far as writing a letter to the Ghanaian authorities to find justice for the boy. There would be protests and marches in Lagos calling justice for Ayogu. It would be a patient wait for the Ghanaian authorities to finally do something and bring the killers of Godwin Ayogu to book. The Accra Police investigating team would pick up the case from the Cape Coast Police, and just within a week, 5 suspects would be arrested in connection to the murder of Godwin Ayogu. breakthrough finally, after so many months of waiting. This news would calm the nerves of all Nigerians and give hope to the family of Godwin Ayogu that at last justice will be served. But when the names and the photos of these 5 suspects would be released to the press by the Accra authorities, it would come as a full-blown shock to the world that all 5 suspected killers of Godwin Ayogu were his close friends, and they were all Nigerians. Now, put in mind that the nature of Godwin Ayogu's murder indicated that it was most definitely carried out by more than one assailant. Godwin was a tall boy, built and physically strong, so for him to be killed in the manner in which he was, it definitely would have taken more than one person. With that in mind, you would understand how easy it was for the Nigerian society to quickly buy into the possibility that all 5 suspects were guilty of the crime, adding to the report that all 5 of them initially ran away from campus when his body was reported found. Now let's look at how each of these boys was directly linked to the death of Godwin Ayogu. Ogunsayo Abayomi, the main suspect, was said to be Ayogu's roommate who borrowed an unsaid amount of money from him to pay up his school fees, but did not pay back. It was said that he traveled to the UK and promised to pay Ayogu when he returned, except when he returned, he moved out of the room he shared with Ayogu and rented an apartment outside of school. The day before Ayogu's body would be found, it was said that Ayogu, along with Jimoh Oluwatobiloba, had gone to Abayomi's place to demand the money. A quarrel ensued and they almost came to blows. This was the last time people claimed they saw Godwin Ayogu, and this was also Oluwatobiloba's connection to the case. Abayomi will lead the new phase of Ayogu's murder. It would become the new story, and it was just very obvious that he had done it. But there is something the blogs wouldn't make clear, and it is important I make it clear because people began mistaking Abayomi for the Ghanaian roommate Abotigwe. They were both referred to as roommates in the blogs, but the fact is Abayomi was a former roommate of Ayogu in 100 level, and not the current roommate at the time of Godwin Ayogu's death. Another thing to note is, although Abayomi borrowed money to pay up his school fees, the money in question was not the money given to Ayogu to pay up his own school fees. It was a totally different money borrowed at a totally different time. Obi Natochi connection was drawn to the report that he and Ayogu were fighting over a girl. Even though it would be established that they didn't fight over a girl and the girl in question was officially with Obi, the police would still hold him as a suspect. Oti Uchechukwu Chijoke's connection would be linked to a vehicle he owned. The police claimed that there were traces of Ayogu's blood on his car tires, and so they held him as a suspect. It is unclear how Isaac Ifidon is directly connected to the case except for the general fact that they were all friends, but at this point it doesn't even matter because the police were clearly reaching for anything they could find. They were desperate to find suspects, so Isaac could easily have dragged a plate of rice with Ayogu 10 years prior to his death and the police would still hold him as a suspect. That was how desperate they were. Another thing to note is the nature in which these boys were arrested and charged. Now, I don't know how it's done in Ghana, but in other parts of the reasonable world, the police places you under arrest, tells you why you're being arrested. That is, they charge you with a crime and tell you to get your lawyers. But in this case, the Ayogu 5 were tricked into being detained. When the Accra police picked up the case from the Cape Coast police, they reached out to these 5 boys and had them come down to Accra to drop another round of statements, separate from the one they had already given to the Cape Coast police. The boys would go to Accra and write another round of statements regardless, but this time they would not return to Cape Coast. Without officially charging these boys of any crime or telling them why they were being detained, they would be brought before a court. Their photos would be taken with no explanation why, and just as the world learns that they have been charged with Godwin Ayogu's death, so too would they. After 3 months of several court appearances, the court would officially dismiss the case, stating that there wasn't enough evidence to prove that these boys had done it. The bloodstains argument on Uche's car would be dismissed as no trace of blood would be found by experts and the car would be ordered returned to Uche. The case didn't even make it to trial. That was how glaring their innocence was. The news of the case dismissal would get to Ayogu's father, who would break down in church and cry. He would eventually leave justice in the hands of God. So, who killed Godwin Ayogu? If the Ayogu 5 didn't do it, then who did? If this isn't a clear case of shifting focus, I do not know what it is. The Ghanaian police knew from the very start who had done it. They knew it was one of their own. They knew the impact of what would be if indeed it was true that a Ghanaian had murdered a Nigerian in their land. And so they shifted focus quickly. They knew it would be better for them if the killers were Nigerians, and so they reached for every reason they could to hold these 5 innocent boys responsible. Now, Abayomi clearly did have a case. He was actually owing Godwin money. But you all need to know that the money he owed Godwin was not the $5,000 given to Ayogu for his school fees that somehow vanished. Abayomi had been owing Godwin since their 100 level, and it clearly didn't seem like Abayomi would suddenly want Godwin dead. The fact is, Abayomi didn't have any urgent reason to kill Godwin, especially not after having a fight with him in the presence of everyone. The Ghanaian court saw through this and dismissed the case against him because they knew that someone had a more urgent reason to want Godwin Ayogu dead. Someone had something to lose if Godwin returned home to his parents with the information that he hadn't paid his school fees. Someone had every reason to be scared because he no longer could account for the 1.9 million naira worth of dollars in his possession. And that was his roommate, Gweyus Abotsi, the same person who lied about the money and was never arrested. At the earliest time of Godwin's death, Abotsi kept in contact with Godwin's parents, his mother especially, because Godwin's mother did mention in an interview with Channels Television that Abotsi said that if he said what he knew about Godwin's death, his life would be in danger.
Because there was this chat we had when he died, that one of his friends said that all his friends are on the run. Why are they running? That if he says what he knows about the death of Godwin, his own life will be in danger. But for the boy to come up and tell us what he knows about it, he was nowhere to be found.
This was before the Nigerian guys were arrested, and Godwin's mother easily assumed that Abotsi helped the police get the boys, whereas the Ghanaian police were only protecting Gweyus by pushing the narrative that 5 Nigerian boys had done it. Godwin hasn't found justice because of national bias showed by the Ghanaian police force. You take a moment to share or make a post with the hashtag Justice for Godwin Ayogu, and let us hope our voices are loud enough once again to call attention to this cause.